Let's read Leviticus chapter 1, the whole chapter. Leviticus chapter 1. The Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. He said, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when anyone among you brings an offering to the Lord, bring as your offering an animal from either the herd or the flock. If the offering is a burnt offering from the herd, you are to offer a male without defect. You must present it at the entrance to the tent of meeting so that it will be acceptable to the Lord. You are to lay your hand on the head of the burnt offering, and it will be accepted on your behalf to make atonement for you. You are to slaughter the young bull before the Lord. And then Aaron's sons, the priests, shall bring the blood and splash it against the sides of the altar at the entrance to the tent of meeting. You are to skin the burnt offering and cut it into pieces. The sons of Aaron, the priest, are to put fire on the altar and arrange wood on the fire. Then Aaron's sons, the priests, shall arrange the pieces, including the head and the fat, on the wood that is burning on the altar. You are to wash the internal organs and the legs with water, and the priest is to burn all of it on the altar. It is a burnt offering, a food offering, an aroma pleasing to the Lord. If the offering is a burnt offering from the flock, from either the sheep or the goats, you are to offer a male without defect. You are to slaughter it at the north side of the altar before the Lord. And Aaron's sons, the priests, shall splash its blood against the sides of the altar. You are to cut it into pieces, and the priest shall arrange them, including the head and the fat, on the wood that is burning on the altar. You are to wash the internal organs and the legs with water, and the priest is to bring all of them and burn them on the altar. It is a burnt offering, a food offering, an aroma pleasing to the Lord. If the offering to the Lord is a burnt offering of birds, you are to offer a dove or a young pigeon. The priest shall bring it to the altar, wring off the head and burn it on the altar. Its blood shall be drained out on the side of the altar. He is to remove the crop and the feathers and throw them down east of the altar where the ashes are. He shall tear it open by the wings, not dividing it completely, and then the priest shall burn it on the wood that is burning on the altar. It is a burnt offering, a food offering, an aroma pleasing to the Lord.
Well, if we have the opportunity to enter into the presence of greatness, what should we do? How should we behave? The great composer Beethoven lived in a German city called Bonn, and his house, the house where he lived, has been preserved and it's a museum now. And you can go there and you can see the piano on which he composed most of his great works of music. Piano is estimated to be worth around $70 million, and not surprisingly, the owners of the museum have roped it off so the public can't go near it. The story is told that about 100 years ago, a group of music students were visiting this museum, the Beethoven Museum, and one of the students was just so excited to be in the presence of greatness that she couldn't resist asking the museum guard if she could cross that rope line and play the piano. Apparently, she offered a very generous tip, and the museum guard said, okay. So she did. She crossed that barrier. She sat down in front of the piano, and she played the opening bars of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Afterwards, apparently, she said to the guard, well, I suppose you've heard some of the world's most famous pianists come here and play this piano. And the guard responded by saying, well, not exactly. And he told her this story. He said, about 2 years ago, I was standing in this very place when Ignacy Paderewski visited the museum. Don't worry if you don't know who Ignacy Paderewski is. I didn't either when I heard this story, but if we lived 100 years ago, we may well have known him as a household name. He was apparently a world-famous virtuoso pianist. So the guard went on. Ignacy Paderewski turns up. He's accompanied by the director of the museum. He's accompanied by the international press. They've all come along and they're all really excited to see this famous pianist play Beethoven's piano. The guard said when he entered the room, Paderewski stood over there in silent contemplation for about 15 minutes, just gazing at the piano. And everyone was watching, and eventually the director went up to him and said, would you play? And Paderewski, with his eyes welling with tears, said, no, I'm not worthy even to touch it. So there we have two very different responses to entering into the presence of greatness, don't we? Which one do you like better? The young student who casually crossed the ropes and played, or the seasoned performer who was frozen with awe and wouldn't touch it? How should we behave in the presence of greatness? And what if we ratchet it up? So we're no longer talking about Beethoven's piano, but we're talking about coming into the presence of the living God. Do we know what to do? Do we know how to behave in the presence of the living God? Well, welcome to our exciting quest for the semester. In Principles Hour this semester, we'll be going on a quest. It'll be a quest with the book of Leviticus as our guide, and it'll be a quest which takes us deep into this profoundly important matter. How to enter into, how to survive, how to thrive in the presence of God. Well, we won't be able to make sense of this book. We won't be able to understand it well unless we understand its context. Leviticus is not a standalone book. It's a sequel to the book of Exodus. And then Exodus is not a standalone book. It's a sequel to the book of Genesis. So as we begin this deep dive into the book of Leviticus today, let's begin by placing it in context, placing it in the big storyline. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to do that with giving 4 snapshots from the story so far. 4 key moments that lead us up to the place where the book of Leviticus starts. So here they are. Moment number 1. It's the cool of the day. Adam and Eve are walking in the garden. Unrestrained joy. Unlimited blessing. Uninhibited intimacy with each other and with God, because they are walking with Him. They're walking in the garden with their Creator. They are enjoying what they were created for, being in the presence of God. That's moment number 1. Moment number 2. A feeling of sickness deep down in the pit of their stomachs. Indescribable loss, horror, pain. All the colour has been drained from the world. Adam and Eve look back towards the garden from which they've just been banished, and they see a flaming sword which reminds them that there will be no return. They are shut out of this place of joy and intimacy and blessing. They are shut out of the presence of God. Moment number 3. Israel, the people of promise, God's people, are gathered together at the foot of Mount Sinai. It's not that long ago that they were slaves in Egypt, suffering, miserable. But then God rescued them so that they might worship Him. And now is the moment it's going to happen. He's coming down to this mountain to meet them. But in that incredible dramatic moment when He does, when He comes with thunder and with lightning and with a thick cloud and with a trumpet, it's terrifying. Entering into God's presence with the sin problem still unresolved is a frightening thing. It's a dangerous thing to do. That's moment number 3. Last one, moment number 4. As the Israelites stand back and admire their finished work, they look at it, the tabernacle. It's finished, it's complete. They've built it exactly according to God's instructions. And it's as they're doing that it happens. A cloud appears. the tabernacle is filled with the glory of God. God has come to dwell amongst his people. But the dream of that return to Eden, that return to safely entering into God's presence once again, safely entering in and enjoying that intimacy and blessing and joy, enjoying being in that place where we were created to be, that dream is still not yet a reality. Yes, God has come, but Moses is standing outside the tent and he can't go in. Moses can't go in. The glory of the Lord is filling the tabernacle, and because of that, Moses can't go in and be there in God's presence. So there we have the 4 moments, the 4 snapshots which lead us up to the place in the story where we start with Leviticus. Have a look with me at Leviticus chapter 1, verse 1. The Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. You see, God is calling out from the tent, calling out to Moses, who, just like Adam and Eve with that flaming sword, Moses is outside. He's stuck outside and he can't go in. The book of Leviticus begins with this dilemma, with this question: when will humanity ever be able to enter back into God's presence safely again? That's the big question at the start of the book of Leviticus. And we're going to do a bit of a spoiler now. We're going to jump forward to the next book, the sequel to Leviticus, Numbers chapter 1, verse 1. And we're going to see that this book begins almost exactly the same as Leviticus, with one slight word change which points to an absolutely world-changing, profound change that's happened. Numbers 1, verse 1, it'll come up on the screen. The Lord spoke to Moses in the tent of meeting. From has become in. The Lord is no longer calling out to Moses who's stuck outside. Now he's speaking with Moses in. Moses is in there, in God's presence, in the place humanity was created to be. How did that happen? How did this wonderful, profound change take place? Well, that's what Principles Hour is going to be about this semester, because that's what Leviticus is all about. It's somewhere between Leviticus 1:1 and Numbers 1:1 that this profound change takes place. It's in this book of Leviticus, where God reveals to his people how they might enter into his presence, how they might survive there, how they might thrive there, how it is that we can be in that place of blessing and joy that we were created to be. We have so much to look forward to, don't we, this semester? Okay, today our focus is chapter 1 of Leviticus. And what we find here in chapter 1, as you would have seen, as Amy read it out to us a few moments ago, is that at the beginning of this book about entering into God's presence to worship him, we have this picture of worship, this picture of true worship. In fact, the opening 7 chapters of Leviticus, we get a description of 5 offerings which God's people might bring him in worship. And chapter 1 is the description of the first of those 5, the burnt offering. So what we have here is this picture of true worship. And as we look at the details of Leviticus 1 now, it's an opportunity for you and I to learn about true worship, about entering into the presence of greatness, into God's presence to worship him. Now, as we do this, as we look at this chapter and learn about worship, of course, we remember that you and I were not living in the age of bringing offerings to the tabernacle. We remember that there are differences, but what we're going to see is that there are principles of worship here in this text in Leviticus 1, which are as true for us today as they were for Israel then. So let's dive in. What can we learn from Leviticus 1's picture of true worship? I'm going to highlight 5 features. The first one is that all are welcome. All are welcome. Who is it that God permits to come to his dwelling place to worship him, to bring an offering? You see in verse 2, it says, when anyone among you brings an offering to the Lord. That's quite striking, isn't it? Anyone's welcome. Everyone's welcome. All are welcome. It's not just the priests. It's ordinary people as well. All are welcome. It's not just men, which would have been common in some ancient Near Eastern settings. Women are welcome too. And as we keep reading the storyline of the Bible, we get to the beginning of Samuel, we see Hannah doing that, bringing a burnt offering to the tabernacle. All are welcome. And it's not just Israel. It's the nations as well. In Leviticus 17, we see that it's anticipated that resident foreigners would also be bringing burnt offerings to the tabernacle. All are welcome. And it's not just the wealthy. The poor are welcome too. That's clear from those 3 different grades of burnt offering that you would have heard Amy read out a moment ago. 3 grades of decreasing cost. Verse 3, the deluxe offering, the bull. Verse 10, there's the standard offering, the goat or the sheep. And verse 14, there's the budget offering of the pigeon or the dove. You see, not having enough money for a bull or a goat doesn't mean that you're excluded from entering into God's presence to worship. Even if you can only afford a pigeon, you are still welcome there. So it's not just priests, but ordinary people, not just men, but women, not just Israelites, but foreigners, not just the wealthy, but also the poor. All are welcome. And that's the first feature we're going to highlight of this picture of true worship. All are welcome. The second one is this: to come voluntarily. To come voluntarily. God's people come to worship him voluntarily. One of the most striking things in Leviticus 1, I think, is that there's actually no command to do this, no command to bring a burnt offering. There's lots of commands about how to do it, when you do it, but it doesn't actually say that we have to do it, that Israel had to do it. Have a look with me again at verse 2. When anyone among you brings an offering to the Lord, bring as your offering an animal from either the herd or the flock. So when you do it, this is how. And then it goes on in the detail, doesn't it? Verse 3, if the offering is from the herd, this is how you do it. Verse 10, if the offering is from the flock, this is how you do it. And finally, verse 14, if it's a bird, this is how you do that. It says how to do it, but it never actually says that you have to. Bringing a burnt offering is entirely voluntary. The worshipper does it of their own volition. That's the second feature of our portrait of true worship. It's voluntary. So far we've got all are welcome, first. Second, to come voluntarily. Now the third one, on God's terms. True worshippers come into his presence on his terms. So just because the worshipper comes voluntarily doesn't mean the worshipper gets to decide how it is they're going to worship God, how it is they're going to behave when they come into his presence. No, this chapter is filled, as you would have seen, it's filled with detailed instructions, detailed prescriptions of what needs to be done. Just walk through the section on the bull with me just for a moment so we can see all this detail. Verse 3, it needs to be a male without defect. And what the worshipper needs to do is start by presenting that at the entrance. Verse 4, then you need to lay your hands on the head of the bull. And then it's going to be accepted to make atonement. That means that there's some kind of a cleansing or purging that takes place so that you're able to head on into the dwelling place, into God's presence. Verse 5, in you go, you slaughter the bull before the Lord. So now you're before the Lord, you're in his presence. Then the priests come along and they splash the blood of the bull onto the altar. Verse 6, you skin it, you cut it up. Verse 7 and 8, the priests step in again. They set up the fire and they put the animal pieces on the fire. Verse 9, you need to wash the organs and the legs. And then finally, the priests burn it all up. These are detailed instructions, aren't they, about what needs to be done. And that's just for the bull. Then comes the instructions for the sheep or goat, and then comes the instructions for the birds. The point here is that God sets the terms on which his people enter into his presence to worship him. His people come voluntarily, yes, but it doesn't mean they come however they like, however they choose. With that story I started with about Beethoven's piano, I wonder which response to being in the presence of greatness you preferred. Which one was better, the joyful student, the awe-frozen performer? See, both wanted to honour Beethoven, both loved Beethoven. Which response was right? Which response was better? It's actually hard to tell, isn't it? Because Beethoven didn't leave detailed instructions about what we should do with his piano after he died, as far as I'm aware. But God did. God reveals to his people here in Leviticus how they enter his presence. And this is a really crucial, enduring principle of worship for us. It endures beyond the era of tabernacle offerings. The principle is that God, not us, sets the terms of worship. If we want to know how to worship him, if we want to know how to be in his presence, if we want to know what pleases him, we don't search our own hearts. We don't search inside ourselves to discover our authentic self and find what's going to be the most authentic expression of ourselves to worship God. We look to him. He's the one that sets the terms and reveals to us what pleases him. So we've seen our first three features of the picture of true worship. First, all are welcome. Second, to come voluntarily. Third, on God's terms. And now fourth, to present a costly gift. True worship involves presenting to God a costly gift. Just think about it. It would have been no small thing for an Israelite to present a bull as an offering to the Lord. It would have represented a significant proportion of the family's assets. And then if you did bring a bull, it couldn't just be any old bull. Verse 3, it had to be a male without defect. That is, the bull had to be the most expensive, the one with the highest market value in your herd. And it's the same for verse 10 with the sheep and the goat. It needed to be a male without defect, the most expensive one. See, the gift which the worshipper presents is costly to the worshipper. And it's not only costly because of the value of what it is that they're giving, it's also costly in the sense that the worshipper doesn't get anything out of it at the end. And this wasn't always the case. With some Old Testament sacrifices, the meat or the grain would actually end up getting eaten either by the priests or the worshippers. So even though it was an offering to God, the worshipper actually got some pretty good stuff out of it as well. That was actually the case for the sacrifice which Anna and I are most familiar with, which was the Muslim sacrifice of Eid al-Adha, which was celebrated in the community around us in Southeast Asia. Now, every year leading up to that moment, leading up to that special day of the sacrifice day, there was excitement in our community. As far as I could tell, most of the excitement was about the fact that we were going to eat satay together. People would tell me excitedly, some of these people were very poor. They say, I can't afford meat. This is the one time or one of the 2 times in the year when I get to eat meat. And I can't wait. That's not so with this offering, the burnt offering. Did you notice what happens to that? Verse 9. The priest is to burn, how much of it? All of it. The priest is to burn all of it on the altar. This whole thing literally goes up in smoke, doesn't it? The worshipper gets nothing. From a human perspective, what a waste! An expensive prime specimen bull burned up till there's nothing left. Couldn't that have been given as food to the poor? Couldn't it have been used better than that? From a human perspective, what a waste. From God's perspective, what an aroma. Verse 9, it's an aroma pleasing to the Lord. There might be nothing in it for the worshipper, but for God, when a worshipper voluntarily gives a costly gift, extravagantly, wastefully giving to God something of great value, to the Lord, that is a sweet and pleasing aroma. When that woman with the expensive jar of perfume, a jar probably worth a year's wages, poured the whole thing out on Jesus' head, do you remember what the disciples said? Why this waste? This could have been sold and the money given to the poor. What a waste. But what did Jesus say? Why are you bothering this woman? She has done a beautiful thing to me. To Jesus, that voluntarily given costly gift of expensive perfume was indeed a pleasing, sweet aroma. It was indeed true worship. Back to Leviticus 1. We've now seen 4 of the 5 features that I want to highlight of this picture of true worship that we have in the chapter. First, all are welcome. Second, to come voluntarily. Third, on God's terms. Fourth, to present a costly gift. And now the last one, fifth, as an expression of thankful devotion. The worshipper presents this gift as an expression of thankful devotion. See, don't forget, there's no command in this chapter to actually make this offering. No one actually had to do it. We saw it was entirely voluntary. So why would anyone dig deep into their limited financial resources to present something as costly as this to the Lord? Well, to answer that question, let's picture ourselves as Israelites for a moment, remembering the backstory, those moments we started with. Life was misery for you. Life was suffering for you when you were a slave in Egypt. But then the creator of the universe, the king of all, came and rescued you. Even though you'd done nothing to deserve that, he rescued you. And now that you're out of Egypt and you're heading to the promised land, he is opening up a way for you to enter into his life-giving presence, for you to enter into that place where you were created to be. See, when you think about it that way, of course you want to lavish on him costly gifts of thankful devotion. Of course you do. You can never even come close to repaying him, but it's not about repayment. It's a gift. It's a gift that says, thank you. A gift that says, I am yours. I devote myself. I devote my entire existence to serving you, to worshipping you. I can never repay you, but let this gift of a whole animal, which is completely burnt up so there's nothing left over for me, let it point to my heart desire to give my whole self to serving you until there's nothing left over for me. In May 2006, the Australian mountain climber Lincoln Hall was part of a team that climbed Mount Everest. But on the descent, he fell ill with altitude sickness. He started to hallucinate. He became confused. For hours, the team that was with him tried to revive him, tried to treat him, but he was unresponsive. He couldn't walk. And as their own oxygen supplies diminished, and as their own problems like snow blindness set in, the team made the very hard decision that they were going to leave this man, apparently dead or very close to it, on the mountain and head down to camp by themselves. And when they got down the bottom of the mountain, when they got back to camp, they released a statement to his family and his friends that he was dead. However, 12 hours later, the next morning, a team that was heading up to the summit, led by a climber named Daniel Mazur, found Lincoln Hall still alive. Now, this team, they abandoned their own dreams of reaching the summit of Mount Everest, and they stopped with him, with Lincoln Hall. They shared their warm clothes with him. They shared their oxygen with him, and over a number of hours, they managed to get him back to camp. They lost their chance to reach the summit of Everest, but they saved this man's life. It was an incredible rescue. Imagine how Hall's wife, who'd already been told that he'd died, felt when she got this second phone call to say, actually, he's still alive. He's been rescued. Now, I don't know how Hall thanked Mazur and the team who saved him, but I'm sure that he wanted to lavish thank you gifts on them. I'm sure he did. But even if he gave them everything, even if he gave them his most valuable possessions, his car, his savings, his house, imagine if he did that. It would never repay them, would it? But it would say thank you. It would say, thank you, I owe you my life. And that's what a burnt offering does. It says, thank you, I owe you my life. In the coming weeks, we'll see that there are other offerings, and those other offerings do other things and say other things. But I think it's really significant here that Leviticus 1 starts with this gift that says, thank you, I owe you my life. This expression of thankful devotion. Thanks for a greater gift already received, a greater grace already received. So there we have it. Leviticus 1's picture of true worship, which is a joyful picture, isn't it? A generous, celebratory response to what God in his grace has already done. All are welcome to come voluntarily on God's terms to present a costly gift as an expression of thankful devotion. That is a picture of true worship. What can we Christians who don't live in the era of tabernacle offerings, what is it that we can take away from this? What is it that we can learn from this? Well, in Romans chapter 12, Paul is explaining to the Christians in Rome what true worship looks like for us now in the new covenant era, in the era where Christ has opened up a better way, where Christ has fulfilled the institutions of Old Testament worship. And as Paul is explaining that to the Romans, do you know what Old Testament image he draws on to describe what it's like for us now? It's a Leviticus 1 type offering that he draws on. Have a look with me at Romans 12, verse 1, and it's up on the screen for you there. Paul writes, "Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship." This is our true and proper worship. Just as in Leviticus 1, it's a voluntary giving by the worshipper. And just as in Leviticus 1, the gift that's given is the whole thing. It's no longer the whole animal. Now it's our whole life, our body, given to the Lord. And just as in Leviticus 1, the result is that God is pleased. This gift is pleasing to God. And just as in Leviticus 1, it's an expression of thanks for a grace already received. Paul says, in view of God's mercy, in view of what God has already done for us in Christ, let's respond with this gift of thanks. So this is true worship for us now. In response to God's mercy in Jesus, in response to God's rescue, our true and proper response is to offer our entire selves to him. Not just part, not just for a few hours of a week or on a Sunday, not just marking off certain parts of our life which we don't want to give to God. We present the whole thing, our body, as a living sacrifice with nothing left over. That is true worship. I remember when I used to work as a lawyer in Canberra, there was a point where I announced to my colleagues that I was leaving, that Anna and I wanted to head into Bible college and become cross-cultural missionaries. One of my colleagues came up to me and worked really hard at trying to talk me out of it. And what he said to me was this. He said, what a waste. What a waste. If you leave law now, all those years of study, all those tens of thousands of dollars you've put into your training, and you've only been doing it a couple of years, to leave now is such a waste. And maybe you've had similar conversations. Maybe you've left things behind that you'd poured great amounts of wealth and money into. And maybe people have come up to you and said, what a waste, don't do it. And certainly from a wealth creation perspective, it is a stupid thing to do, isn't it? It's a wasteful thing to do. From a human perspective, what a waste. From God's perspective, what an aroma. See, when we devote ourselves to God and to God's purposes, that is a pleasing aroma to God. The woman who commits her time to evangelism, the man who serves on cleanup at church, the worker who lavishes big chunks of his salary on donations to Christian ministry, the parents who pour out their lives in the care of their children or in the care of their adult child with a disability, the family who sacrifices much to move to a gospel poor place so that they can be a light there, the retiree who seeks out the lonely in order to be Christ to them. These costly gifts, these wasteful gifts, voluntarily made in response to God's mercy, they are a pleasing aroma to God. They are acts of true worship. Back when I was at uni, there was a girl who was very appropriately called Grace. Grace wasn't particularly rich, but one day she sent out invitations to everyone she knew, both Christian and non-Christian, to a big party, and she'd hired the great hall of Old Parliament House to hold this party, and she called it Grace's Everything Party. Come along to Grace's Everything Party. And all of us who got this invitation were completely intrigued. What's it about? It's not her birthday. Is there some big announcement? Is she getting married that she wants to tell us? What's going on? So we all turned up to this Grace's Everything Party, curious to see what was going on. And we turned up, it was lavish. There was food, there was drink, there was entertainment. There was no big announcement or anything like that. But during the course of the night, Grace explained to us that Grace's Everything Party was designed to celebrate that Grace is everything. She wanted to spend what money she had in a party that said thank you to God for his grace. And she wanted everyone who came to hear of God's grace and to experience God's grace. And it probably seemed wasteful to some of us who were there at the party that night, but to God, I'm pretty sure it was a pleasing aroma.